This is a session for discernment. Many of us are very supportive of what you'll hear today about NVDA and CCA, but we felt strongly that we should be helping people to make up their own mind what they think about it and whether they want to be involved and how they want to be involved, rather than try and say, you must do this. So hopefully that'll be helpful from that side. And if you'd like to think about whether in a week or so it might be helpful to have a further discussion session on discernment, then let's talk about that at the end, and we can see whether it would be good to come back. So without further ado, less of me, let's get on to David. David, thank you so much for joining us. Can I ask you, you're Reverend Professor David Jenkins, which is a very impressive title. Can you tell us about your journey, how you earned, how you got to where you got to, and how you came to faith?
Yeah, that's that should keep us going for a little while. My first passion was the land, and I studied at Reading University in the College of Estate Management there, and so I took my first degree in land management. And I worked primarily in as a surveyor for my early years, for the formative years. And later I became an academic. I did a master's program, and I was looking at artificial intelligence. So I did my MPhil that way, and then subsequently bumped into Jesus and became a Christian, and I did a theology degree subsequent. So it's been a sort of a long path, shall we say, but quite an interesting one. And I'm here this evening with Gaynor as my partner, who is just out of shot. We pretty strongly have been supporting each other for the last years, and I think Gaynor is also my staunchest critic, and I'm hers, so I've got to be on my best behavior this evening. And I was really glad to hear you say, as you kicked off, Staffan, that there's no coercion in relation to non-violent direct action, because it's a deeply personal decision, isn't it? I know that I can tell you something about my background in a moment, but I can tell you that at this time in my life, coming back into political action has been quite a big step for me personally, and that I'm not treading on this particular part of the journey lightly.
So why has it been a big step for you?
Well, I think sort of in terms of my personal development, as a youngster, I was brought up in the church, but it's the familiar story. Around about the age of 15, I made that break, sort of with that supreme arrogance of the 15-year-old. I knew it all, and I knew it better. And it was a long time before I came back into the fold. And I took with me, initially at least, ideas around pacifism and about justice. But I became a Marxist, albeit reluctantly. It seemed to be the best thing on offer. And so I did get involved in social action from a tender age. I was involved with the anti-apartheid movement, and later with the miners' strike. So I was seasoned, if you like, as an activist by the time I was in my late 20s. A trade unionist, a member of the Labour Party, and so on and so forth. And then I think the miners' strike, the defeat of the miners, dealt the movement a significant blow. And I felt that very personally. I spent quite a long time reflecting. I had no expectation during that period that I would end up back in the Christian fold. But I became a Christian quite dramatically when I was about 38, 39 years old. someone witnessed to me, and I suddenly realized the truth of it, realized that I'd been turning my back on the truth of it, and I became a Christian active in a local church.
So what did that do to the sort of the inner working? You got the sort of the social kind of things, socialism, labour, and at the same time you had to sort of take on a whole new set of values. Were they compatible? Did they clash?
They clashed. I mean, I was very fortunate to have a minister in the Reverend Norman Sinclair who was very wise in these matters. And I can remember him saying to me, David, you're going to need to put some of these things that you currently hold up on a shelf and leave them there and bring them down from time to time. But you now need to, sort of learn the way of Christ. And that became, that became my, sort of my life's focus really, was learning the Christian way.
And have you managed to integrate that, or do you still find things drop off the shelf on your head?
I think, yeah, there's still the occasional surprise. And I think well, hopefully the journey isn't over yet, but I've managed to reconcile quite a lot of these things over the years. And it's partly through experiences, it's partly been through the wisdom of other people, other Christians that I've encountered on the way. Initially, my testimony was that here I was, sort of a Marxist, very anti-Christian, and now professing, sort of professing a faith. And that was, yeah, that was not without its ironies, of course, and the people who knew me struggled very much with me and what was becoming of me. But I've settled down a little bit since those days, I think.
So you've talked about pacifism becoming really important to you.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that developed?
Yeah, I was impressed by the pacifist, sort of movement during my formative years. I mean, Martin Luther King died when I was 16 years of age. That tragic end to that campaign, and that had a profound effect on me. It had an effect in two ways. First of all, I had appreciated the peaceful struggle that was happening. But then I started to doubt very much if you could achieve anything in this world peaceably when the likes of Martin Luther King could be gunned down. And I think it was, it was there or thereabouts in my life that I was entertaining a Marxist notion. And I was impressed more by the Marxist attitude towards justice than I was to its ideas of social change. And so there was I had a period of unlearning at that stage, which was difficult for me. And then a period of relearning at a later stage when, I twisted things back around again. And I experienced, personally, police brutality firsthand. We saw it in the miners' strike, but I can remember one struggle where we were alongside some women, Asian workers in London at a place called Grunwick's. And we had our first encounter with the special patrol groups. And they weren't so much interested in arresting us as beating us and pushing us over walls. I seem to remember, sort of quite a sharp experience of the state. I mean, personally, I was sufficiently cowardly to be relying on other people in that movement. And that was one of the things that eventually, for me, decided that I could no longer call myself a Marxist. Right. It was that notion of, the means, really.
Wow. So you talked to me when we had a chat about to help me explain pacifism and passivism. And so I'd really appreciate if you could just sort of take us through that a little bit.
Well, Yeah, I think that's that's a deeply personal thing for me, but I guess sociologically it happens to a lot of people that they're far more active and far more willing to accept risks when they are younger, and the pacifism that I I espoused did give way to a more armchair pacifism when I was in my 40s and 50s. I still wanted to change the world, but I just couldn't see my way to do it through the kinds of social action opportunities that were out there. And, you know, what did I do instead? I became a pastor in a Baptist church and taught the ways of peace. And yeah, I think the passive part of me grew to the point of perhaps even timidity. I got to the place where maybe I wouldn't stand up for myself, that the kind of Christian that you understand as being a bit of a doormat, really. And that's not a good place to be, but I got to that place.
So talk us a bit more about the climate change piece, because you got involved in climate change and in Africa, didn't you? I understand. Tell me about Africa, what happened, and your experience of that side of things, and how it changed you as a Christian.
Yeah. Well, I was saying that we got involved in local church, and the criterion for us in selecting a church was that it would be local and that it would be active, and we didn't have any strong denominational sense, Gaynor and I. And we encountered some very interesting people in some different milieu. So when it came to environment and climate, I was working, you know, sort of at the university. I was teaching. I was a researcher in these particular areas. And in my spiritual life, I encountered Dowie Hughes, who was the theological director of Staffan back then. And he introduced me to Joel Edwards, and they were talking to me and others about engagement in the global south, how global warming was going to impact the global south, and indeed was already beginning to, and how we really needed to be active. We needed to be active there. Yeah, and through that invitation, Gaynor and I got involved with an organization called Partnership Overseas Network Trust, which was set up to create partnerships between Britain, in Wales particularly, and parts of Africa. And the first link that was created was in Uganda. So I took myself and Gaynor and the rest of my family eventually over to Uganda. We met with churches on the ground, and we asked questions in very impoverished communities about what people there would like to see, what development they would like to see if they could choose themselves. So there was a period of years when we were simply listening, and then we looked at the resources that we might be able to muster from our own communities, and we developed the notion of community-to-community partnerships. And so in Pontypridd, where I was at the university, a group formed with Mbale in eastern Uganda, and we, over the years, sent hundreds of delegations in both directions on health, on climate, on development, on education, simply on sort of church relationships, so there was a significant momentum here between these two communities, and it was a joy to be part of that and to be learning in that. And then we discovered that other people were taking interest in what we were doing, and they were particularly interested in some of the work that I was doing with friends on the ground who were interested in permaculture, who were interested in rewilding, who were interested in anticipating the worst impacts of climate change on land particularly. And that was my particular area. And the Welsh government decided that they would like to piggyback the work that we were doing and also, thankfully, inject funds into this. They had a Wales for Africa committee and group within the Assembly, and we became their representatives on the ground for a significant number of local actions, which then increased our profile, of course, with the Ugandan government. And to cut a long story short, we saw a very productive, a very fruitful period of collaboration, which still happens to today, although I'm not as engaged in that as once I was.
So that's really impressive. That's fantastic to hear that on the ground kind of work. But somehow I think you're saying, you talked to us about, you've been quite radical at one point, and then you've gone into pacifism and passivism, and then something's happened in you that's moved you to another place, to the Christian Climate Action and the NVDA. Tell us about how you've moved into CCA and that kind of activism.
Well, I've got to be honest here. My experiences in Uganda made me pretty angry about about what was happening in the world, particularly what was sort of happening within the development paradigm. But the critical issue for me came a few years back when the IPCC came forward and told us what their latest assessment was on the impact of climate change on all this work we were doing. And I was aware from talking to colleagues, friends who were involved with Christian Aid, that very often the work that had been done, good work, was being nullified by the sudden and dramatic changes that were occurring in climate. And that was intensely frustrating. But when the IPCC came out in 2018 and said, really, this has moved beyond, there are sort of 12 years in which we need to turn this around, that struck right to the heart of me. I was electrified by that, the sudden sort of dramatic realization that what we'd been doing up until now, that everything that we'd be doing in a sense was potentially wasted because of the sort of the extent of the climate emergency. And so I've grown used to cognitive dissonance. I'm all the time trying to catch up with where the climate science is telling us that reality really is. And that's been a dramatic thing. And I've met plenty of people in this process who are grieving, people who are angry, and people who are determined to try and sort of to turn this thing around.
So you've turned from you're sort of almost timid passivism into being part of turning this thing around.
Well, that's the ambition.
I'm not saying you can do it on your own. I'm saying, but you've had a change in your attitude from the classic thing.
Yeah, the attitude, the ambition comes from the realization that sort of time was being wasted. And I think when you start to think in terms of the real urgency in the situation, you become open to other arguments. And I can remember one of my responses to listening to and reading the IPCC report in full was going to an Extinction Rebellion meeting and reading all these very nice people who were as dismayed as I was by the situation that we are in. Of course, I mean, there have been, sort of prophetic voices out there all the time, haven't there? And, sort of present company included. But I think it takes something dramatic to turn the situation around for people, and it certainly took the IPCC report for me. I mean, sorry.
No, just saying. So from getting that IPCC thing, how does it actually turn into David doing different things on the ground? You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was a period of anxiety and prayerfulness, during which I started rethinking some of the things that I'd learned in my youth about radical action. I'm beginning to see that no matter how much we reformed, we might not make any impression at all in the time that was said to be available to us. And yeah, so I started thinking the unthinkable, that I might stand on a picket line again, and that I might risk arrest, and that I might break the law. And I mean, the theology came very quickly and readily to me. You know, sort of, we're never very far away from understanding the rebel Jesus. It's just that we tend very easily to deny that in ourselves. And now I was seeing the rebel Jesus and thinking, oh my goodness, I have been not listening. I'm a failure. And that's, you know, that's a, you know, hard yard to walk. But the answer was stand there with people. And that's what I did. I went to 2 or 3 actions in 2018. I met the redoubtable Sheila Collins, who's on the line. Gaynor introduced me to her. And Sheila told me what she thought in no uncertain terms about nonviolent direct action. And I went away and thought some more about it. Still not quite ready, really, to risk arrest, but aware that this could potentially make a difference.
Have you been arrested?
Oh yes, yes. Yeah, I finally got to that place in the October Rebellion last year. I did a naughty thing. I sat down in the road, and for my trouble, I was charged with conspiracy to cause a public nuisance and obstruction of the highway.
And how did that feel?
At the time, it was a moment of exquisite joy for me, I can tell you. I suddenly felt that, you know, sort of that I had done something right by my Lord. And I've not really sort of moved on from that. I still think that that was the right thing to have done. And it's introduced me to a lot of interesting people in XR and Christian Climate Action who have helped me, you know, sort of develop that understanding. And I'm still in that process. Wow.
So can I just, you're a Christian minister, and you're looking at, and you know, we've all been Christians for a long time, and you're actually advocating breaking the law. Do you ever get a twinge of, you know what, am I really doing the right thing?
Yeah, it wouldn't be me and I wouldn't be human if I didn't, but those twinges come fewer and they're further between. I think the theological argument that clinched it for me was there's this sort of double move that we tend to make, in that we conflate sin with law breaking, and then we conflate the law with justice. And I think, you know, sort of, I sat in that particular, you know, sort of mire for a very long time. But I don't feel like that anymore. I'd much rather listen to the Holy Spirit and do what I think the Holy Spirit is calling me to do in the particular situation. And that might mean significantly more law breaking in the future.
Wow. Well, I mean, I really want to open it up in a moment to ask other people to get involved in the discussion. But can you just tell me, do you have to get arrested to be involved with CCA?
No, not at all. I can remember that when I first encountered CCA, I didn't really have any intention of being arrested at all. But there are lots of roles to perform within CCA, and not everyone is willing to be arrested. It's a deeply personal. I think, decision, and it's one that I'm glad I made. I just need a lot more people to make it at some stage if we're going to address the situation that we confront.
And did you feel that you were under pressure to do something like that?
Oh gosh, no. The CCA for me is, sort of a place I go, which is a safe place, where I meet with people who are somewhat like me in that they're deeply concerned about climate, and don't have all the answers, and are aware of the urgency. And we're together just trying to develop ideas, find ways in which we can act non-violently to bring the authorities' attention to the problem. Because they clearly haven't been listening, have they?
Yeah. Is there anything, before we open up the discussion now, that you think we should have talked about first?
I didn't say very much about the university. I've not really been, sort of in a prophetic role, more a scribal role for most of my life. And I had two roles at the university. One was always alerting students to the depth of the crisis that was going to come in their time. Hadn't really realized when I started on that road that it was going to come in my time too. And also accounting for the problem on the ground. So I've done in my time, I've done a lot of studies of what's happening to land, and I've collaborated with scientists and so on and so forth in the process in order to get to the understanding that I have today.
Wow. Oh, thank you for that. I think we should now probably stop the recording if you don't mind, Ruth. That would be great. And open